3 days after I buried my father, my mother-in-law showed up at my door with a cashier's check for $1.8 million and told me she was buying me out of my own marriage. She didn't knock. She had a key. My husband had given her one for emergencies, which apparently included this. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my dad's old cardigan, the one that still smelled faintly like his woodshop, when I heard the front door open and her heels click across the hardwood. She came around the corner, holding a tan leather folder, like she was closing a real estate deal. My sister-in-law was behind her, eyes on the floor, and behind her, and I want you to understand how much I am not exaggerating here, was my husband's paralegal. A woman I'd met exactly twice at company holiday parties. "We need to talk," my mother-in-law said, setting the folder on the table in front of me, right on top of the sympathy card my coworker had dropped off that morning. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. I was still wearing the black dress from the repast. "I just got home from my father's funeral," I said. "I know. That's actually why now is a good time." I've replayed that sentence 1,000 times since. That's actually why now is a good time. She had done the math on my grief and decided it made me a better target. My father died on a Tuesday. Heart attack, sudden, no warning, the kind that doesn't give you time to say anything you've been meaning to say. He was 61, he had a woodworking shop in the garage and a vegetable garden in the back, and he had just, the month before, finally retired. He'd been planning a road trip with his brother to see the national parks. He had a list. He'd shown it to me on his phone. "I'm 32 years old. I'm a licensed estate planning attorney. I have spent 8 years helping other families navigate the paperwork of loss, and none of that, not 1 hour of it, had prepared me for sitting in my own childhood home, watching strangers carry my father's body out through the front door. And now I was sitting at my own kitchen table 4 days later, and my mother-in-law was explaining to me, very calmly, as though she were going over a contract, that my husband had decided the marriage wasn't working, and that she had arranged a settlement to make things clean. "The amount reflects fair compensation for the years," she said. "The house is in the family trust, so that stays, but we're being generous with the liquid number." I looked at the check again. $1.8 million. My name was printed on it. It was already signed. "Where is my husband?" I said. "He's at the office. He thought it would be easier this way." "He thought it would be easier," I repeated. "He has a lot of respect for you, sweetheart. This doesn't need to get messy." I want to tell you that I said something powerful in that moment. I want to tell you I stood up and told her exactly what she could do with that folder. But the truth is, I just sat there for a long time looking at my father's cardigan sleeve. The cuff was fraying. He'd never let me buy him a new one. "I'd like you to leave," I said finally. My mother-in-law didn't move right away. She looked at me the way she always had, patient, faintly disappointed, like I was a renovation project that wasn't going according to plan. She had never made a secret of the fact that she'd wanted a different kind of daughter-in-law. Someone from the right family, the right background, someone who would have been grateful for a check. "Take a few days," she said, sis-foldered toward me. "But don't take too long. The offer has a window." She left. The paralegal left without ever having said a word. My sister-in-law paused in the doorway and looked back at me with something on her face I couldn't quite read. Not quite guilt, not quite apology. Then she left too. I sat at the table for another hour. Then I called my best friend, who is also a family law attorney, and I told her everything. There was a long pause on her end. "Okay," she said. "Don't touch that check. Don't cash it. Don't acknowledge it in writing. Can you get somewhere to stay tonight? I'm already at home, not your home. Somewhere they don't have a key to." I packed a bag that night. I went to my dad's house, which was still mine to use. He'd updated his estate plan 8 months before he died, a fact that I had helped him with, a fact that was about to become very relevant. Let me back up. I met my husband 6 years ago at a conference. He was charming and funny, and I thought, genuinely, that he was someone who had built himself. He talked about working his way up, about not wanting to rely on his family's money, about wanting to earn things on his own terms. I believed him. I had no reason not to. What I did not understand, not fully until much later, was that there is a particular kind of person who talks constantly about not wanting their family's money because they have already arranged to receive it in a more complicated way. The house we lived in was in a family trust. The car he drove was registered to a holding company his mother controlled. His salary at the firm was supplemented, quietly, on paper I had never been shown, by a consulting arrangement with his father's company. I didn't know any of this on our wedding day. I found out in pieces, the way you always find out the things that matter. The first piece came about 2 years in, when I mentioned to a colleague that my husband was considering a job offer from another city, and she looked at me strangely and said, "But doesn't his family have him locked into the firm for another 3 years? The retention agreement?" I went home and asked him about it. He laughed it off, said it was more complicated than that, said she had misunderstood. I let it go. The second piece came when I was putting together our joint tax return and found a deposit I didn't recognize, $12,000, recurring quarterly from an LLC I'd never heard of. He said it was a consulting fee. I asked for the contract. He said it was informal. I let it go again. The third piece came about a year ago, when his mother, during a dinner she'd orchestrated to feel casual, sat across from me and said, "You know, you and I have never really talked about what you want. Long term. For your future." I'd thought it was an overture. I'd been almost touched by it. I was not as smart then as I am now. His mother had been building a case for months, talking to their attorney, talking to the firm's HR department, talking, I later learned, to a private investigator she had hired to document my schedule, my habits, my friendships, looking for anything she could use to characterize me as unstable or unreliable, the kind of person a jury or a judge might not find sympathetic. She found nothing, because there was nothing. I am professionally and personally extraordinarily boring. I go to work, I come home, I call my dad on Sundays. I called my dad on Sundays. What she had not accounted for was what I do for a living. I am an estate planning attorney. I have spent my entire career reading documents that people assume other people will never read. Trusts, amendments, letters of instruction, beneficiary designations, holding company structures, the specific and deliberate way that money moves between entities when someone wants it to be hard to follow. I am genuinely, professionally good at following it. The night I stayed at my dad's house, I couldn't sleep. I sat at his kitchen table, the same one where he'd helped me with homework, the same one where he'd told me, years ago, that the most important thing he could give me was the ability to take care of myself, and I started making a list. Everything I knew, everything I suspected. Every document I had seen, every figure that hadn't added up, every conversation that had felt off in a way I couldn't explain at the time. By morning I had 4 pages. I called my friend back and told her I needed a forensic accountant and a good discovery attorney. She had both on speed dial. We met that afternoon at her office. Here is what they found over the following 6 weeks through proper legal channels and formal discovery requests, and the kind of patient, meticulous document review that my mother-in-law had clearly not anticipated from someone she thought was too grief-stricken to function. The house, the one my mother-in-law had told me was in the family trust, and therefore untouchable, had been retitled 18 months ago. My husband's name had been on it. It was removed quietly in an amendment to the trust that had never been disclosed to me. This is a problem legally when you are married, because the transfer of a marital asset without disclosure is not a gray area. The consulting arrangement, the quarterly deposits, came from an LLC that was owned by a holding company that was partially funded by a partnership that included, as one of its original capital contributors, my husband's own retirement account. He had, in effect, been paying himself from himself through a structure designed to look like outside income. This is also a problem legally when you are calculating marital assets for a divorce. The paralegal who had shown up at my house, the silent one, turned out to be someone my husband had been in a relationship with for approximately 14 months. This I confirmed not through the investigator but through her own emails, which had been subpoenaed as part of the discovery process. She had written to a friend 5 months prior about his family working on getting rid of the wife so we can finally stop hiding. She had used those words, getting rid of the wife. My mother-in-law had hired a PI to investigate me. What she hadn't done was consider that in a divorce proceeding, her communications, including her emails to their family attorney discussing the timeline for approaching me and the strategic advantage of the grief window, would also be discoverable. The strategic advantage of the grief window. She had written that, in an email, sent from her personal account. I'm going to pause here and tell you something about myself because I think it matters. I am not, by nature, a vengeful person. I genuinely don't think I have the personality for it. What I am is thorough. I was raised by a man who taught me that you measure twice before you cut anything, that you do the work before you make the claim, that you don't raise your voice when the documents will do the talking for you. He said that in his workshop, about woodworking, but it applied to everything. So I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning accuracy. The filing was substantial. Our discovery responses were detailed. The exhibits were organized and clearly labeled. When my mother-in-law's attorney received the first set of interrogatories and document requests, I was told, by my attorney who had it secondhand from opposing counsel's assistant, that there was a long silence on the phone, followed by the words, "How much do they have?" They had everything. The retitling of the house documented, the consulting structure unraveled, the undisclosed transfers cataloged, the emails about the grief window printed and tabbed, the relationship with the paralegal confirmed and dated. A pattern of financial concealment going back to the first year of our marriage, small enough each instance to look like administrative oversight, large enough in aggregate to constitute fraud. My husband's attorney called mine 3 weeks before trial and asked about settlement. My attorney called me. "They want to talk numbers," she said. "Tell them we're available Tuesday," I said. The settlement conference lasted 4 hours. My mother-in-law was not in the room, which her attorney had apparently insisted on after someone on their side decided her presence was not helping their position. My husband sat across the table from me for the first time in 8 weeks. He looked tired. He looked like someone who had spent 8 weeks being told by his mother that this would all be over quickly and had just recently understood that it would not. I didn't feel angry looking at him. I want to be honest about that. I felt something closer to sad, not for myself, not anymore, but for the 6 years I'd spent believing in a version of him that had been at least partly a performance. I don't know if he had always intended to be the person he turned out to be, or if he had just slowly become it. Either way, it wasn't my problem to solve anymore. We reached a settlement that afternoon. The house, the one I had been told was untouchable, was sold. My share of the equity, plus the undisclosed transfers, plus interest calculated from the date of each transfer was substantial. The consulting income was recalculated as marital income for the full duration of the marriage, which changed the asset picture considerably. The retirement account was divided according to what it actually contained, not what had been disclosed on the initial financial statements. I don't share the number because that's not the point. The point is that my mother-in-law had looked at me, grief-stricken, in my dead father's cardigan 4 days out from burying him, and had calculated that I was at my weakest and therefore at my easiest, and she had been wrong about what my weakness looked like. She had confused grief with incapacity. She had seen a woman sitting still and decided the stillness meant defeat. My dad used to say that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who doesn't need to raise their voice. He meant it as a compliment. He meant it as instruction. I'm not going to tell you the transition back to my own life was easy or clean or cinematic. It wasn't. I cried in my car, in parking garages more times than I can count. I had weeks where I'd call my dad's number out of habit and hear voicemail and have to sit with both losses at once. The marriage and the person who would have known exactly what to say about it. There were bad nights. There were mornings that took everything I had. But I had my dad's house, which he had left to me in an estate plan we had built together, carefully, with the specific intention that it would be mine and mine alone. I had my career, which no one had ever given me. I had my friend, who had sat across a conference table from a hostile attorney for 4 hours without flinching. And I had the particular clarity that comes, I think, from being tested at the worst possible moment and finding out you didn't collapse. My mother-in-law sent me a message 6 months after the settlement closed. It was brief. She said she hoped I could understand that everything she had done had been for her family. I didn't respond. But I thought about what my dad would have said. He would have said that you can understand something and still hold people accountable for it. That those two things aren't opposites. That understanding why someone did a thing is not the same as deciding it was acceptable. He would have said, measure twice. He would have said, do the work before you make the claim. He would have said, the documents will do the talking. He was right about all of it. I'm still in the house. His vegetable garden came back this spring. I didn't do anything. It just came back, the way perennials do. The tomatoes he planted last summer are coming up on their own. I've been learning to take care of them. I'm not as good at it as he was, not yet. But I'm learning. That's what I know how to do. I learn, and I'm thorough, and I don't raise my voice when the work will speak for itself. And it did.